Welcome to Media Melanie Talks TV. I'm Melanie, and today I'm back to talk about School Spirits Season 2 on Paramount+. The season is over. As of right now, when I'm recording this video, we still don't have that Season 3 news. I have been frantically refreshing my Google searches, hoping we get an announcement soon. If we do, awesome. We now have some new stories that we can dive into in a third season. And I guess if not, our girl Maddie did get her body back, but there are still some things that definitely need closure. This episode was giving. We got 2 body swaps, 1 crossover that came with a big side of tears for me, R.I.P. Wally, 1 new ghost, ? Not sure exactly how Simon got in there. We have a Scar prisoner, more hospital ghost content. We saw Maddie's dad twice in this episode, which is pretty darn exciting if you ask me. And we got more closure in terms of the fire, who started it, exactly what transpired. You know what? I knew our girl Janet was not responsible for it. However, one of the biggest remaining questions is, what is the tie to the school? Like Mr. Martin said, why have so many people died there? If you missed one of my last theory videos, it was on whether or not Split River High School is cursed. I went into some different theories and principles, talking about the potential ties to the land, any spiritual connection. So don't miss that, but I'm really excited to see if we do get this third season, what we are going to learn about Split River High School. This episode, Fire Talk to Me, which continues the extremely clever episode names with nods to TV shows and movies, which, by the way, this is a reference to Twin Peaks. I didn't realize that, so thanks to the person who pointed that out to me in the comments of my last video previewing this episode. Can't believe that I never watched Twin Peaks and that I'm admitting it here on a public forum. It's been on my list for a long time, and yes, I will probably get to it eventually. Either way, very clever name for this episode, especially given we got so much more context on the fire itself. Before we get more into this episode, though, I would love if you would please like this video and hit that subscribe button, and also just a moment of gratitude for all of the awesome School Spirits fans who've stuck with me throughout this season. It has been so much fun talking about this show. So much, in fact, I have decided to do a live stream on Friday, March 7th. So be sure you're subscribed, hit that notification bell so you do not miss out. It'll be a great opportunity to come and chat live in the comments, share some of your thoughts on the season, and just join some other fans to chat about it. So, pretty excited for that. I'm going to get into the specifics of what happened in this episode, and I will end with my season highs, my season lows, and the biggest questions heading into season 3. So, be sure you stick around for the whole video. There are essentially 3 storylines that end up intertwining within this episode. We've got Nicole, Xavier, and Claire over at Red Pine investigating Eugene's storage locker. Sheriff Baxter and Xavier having a heart-to-heart. Sheriff Baxter talking to Sandra as well, who, by the way, fell asleep at a stop sign and was sobering up. I am so glad our girl Sandra made it out of this season alive. There were some definite moments this season where I kept thinking, oh no, our girl Sandra is not gonna make it out of this season. Because the cast kept saying, think of the worst thing that could happen, and it's even worse than that. And for me, that felt like something related to Sandra. Now we know Simon has entered the afterlife chat. What happened to him? Did he literally off himself so he could go and search for Maddie? Like, how did he get into that scar? Simon has been Maddie's biggest ally throughout this entire series. He's been trying to help her get her body back, and the big irony of it all, and the worst thing that I think they've been referencing, is the fact that Simon is seemingly stuck in the Split River afterlife. How did he get there? He went running back to, of course, get Maddie's spirit because they're loading her body into the ambulance, and that's the boundary of the school, in this big rush to get her back into her body. And how does Simon take his own life and enter that scar? Is he still alive? Was he able to somehow enter it while he is living? I don't know if that can happen. We have not seen any living person enter a scar. If he is not living, or somehow his body is incapacitated, what exactly happened? Did he ask one of the ghosts to help? I don't think so, because it seems as though they were passing each other, right? Maddie and the ghosts are running outside. Simon ran back in to look for her and maybe just didn't see anybody, assumes the ghosts were still all inside, and then what? Takes his own life? I mean, really? that is such a testament to the strength of their friendship and how much he was trying to help her. But it also doesn't make sense because in the last episode, we had him setting up that college interview again. People had pointed out in the comments of my last video that why would Simon self-delete if in fact he's trying to get back into college and get his life back on track again? That's definitely not behavior of somebody who's having those tendencies, but obviously something triggered his entry into this scar, whether or not that is him being dead or maybe he found some other way to get in there without actually self-deleting. I'm not sure, but I would love for you guys to drop your thoughts in the comments because Simon entering this afterlife is so fascinating. Is Maddie going to be able to see him like he saw her? I think that's a pretty big question, and I would assume so. And if not, then that's pretty sad because it shows that Simon was more into the friendship than Maddie was, and the special connection maybe only went one way. Big TBD on exactly what will transpire with Simon if we do get that third season. So yeah, we've got a few different things happening. Of course, we had Sheriff Baxter with Sandra and Mr. Anderson. We have Xavier, Nicole, and Claire at Red Pine trying to investigate Eugene's locker. And then we have the Split River High School stuff, all ending up culminating in the end with that scene in the hospital where Xavier is still able to see Maddie's dad, who we also saw when she was drowning inside of her scar. We've been waiting for that scene all season, and we saw it in teasers and trailers, Maddie drowning in the sea of green. Well, we know that that's related to her scar, and very clearly, now that we have seen inside of Maddie's scar, the biggest things haunting her are her parents, and it raises questions. Did Maddie literally watch her dad drown and was not able to save him? Is that something that's been haunting her? We know that he did drown in some river fishing trip. There was a mention of that by Sandra, but what exactly happened? I mean, and if he did drown in a river, why is he at the hospital? Which leads me to think that perhaps he was unconscious, brought to the hospital, and ended up dying there. Perhaps he was in a coma or they were not able to resuscitate him or whatever it is. I was expecting Maddie to show up at the hospital in a coma and be able to see her dad in the afterlife, not just in that scar. And what's interesting is, does Maddie's dad know that he's also simultaneously haunting her in a scar? Wild times being a ghost. I like that Sheriff Baxter eventually seems to come around more to the fact that Xavier's telling him, hey, you need to trust me. There is something going on here. And when Sandra does tell him, Maddie just has not been the same, I think it does start to click for Sheriff Baxter. And who knows, maybe he will end up buying more into this and at least believing his son, because like Sandra and Maddie, Sheriff Baxter and Xavier have had quite the fractured relationship themselves. He was not very nice to his son, especially in season 1. And by the way, I had a theory video earlier this season about who could potentially be related to the Hamiltons in the present day timeline. I prognosticated that perhaps Sheriff Baxter could be the son of Janet's dad, or there is some familial relation there. By the way, my theory has not been proven wrong, so we will see if that ends up coming to fruition, or if they did just mention Janet's brother, whose name is Dale, for the sake of setting up the fact that Janet did have a family unit and adding more dramatic tension to the storyline of her family and all of the strife that her dad has really caused for them. Speaking of Janet's dad, there was a line in one of the last episodes where Janet said, "My dad is haunting me," but it was only in the closed captions. It was actually edited out of the show. I'm not sure why they didn't just leave it in, because we did get to see Janet's actual dad haunting her scar. We got to see the connected scars of Janet and Mr. Martin. And something interesting with the lighting in this episode, traditionally, all of the scars have been illuminated in red. We got a lot of green here, and I imagine it's because the ghosts are simultaneously within these scars, and perhaps the duality of this red and green signifies that there will be opportunities to cross over, like we saw with Janet. Was anybody else pretty shocked that Janet didn't walk through the door? And I was even thinking, when Mr. Martin tried to run through, do we think it would have actually let him through without having had that forgiveness of Janet? Or, I mean, would it have just locked up? But either way, I was kind of hoping Janet would get to cross over and have some peace. But her not doing that does show her vested interest and dedication to the school she's been stuck at for 66 years. And the girl wants some answers. Who can blame her? And even though the door did illuminate and showed that she could likely cross over, I'm not convinced that she should, even though she got the truth and the closure she needed. She's a scientist. She wants to have proof and evidence of what exactly was going on at the school. Janet is just as fascinated with this mystery as all of us, and let us hope that we get a third season so we can dive more into it. So let's talk a little bit about Red Pine. We didn't get to actually see Eugene again, but he does leave this message for Nicole that says, he's been thinking about their conversation and that there's still more to it. They end up going to break into the storage unit at this nursing home. Luckily, there was a VCR there, just happenstance, I suppose, so that way they could play the VHS tape that they found in Eugene's box. The VHS was from the Historical Society archives, and it gave quite a few interesting pieces of dialogue. So let's go through that conversation. Eugene says, "I know for a fact Janet's father was the reason Mr. Martin was fired. I overheard them talking about it the day after she died. The police don't believe me, but I know in my bones Mr. Martin started that fire on purpose. He wanted revenge. He killed her." Then the reporter says, "Hey son, don't spread rumors." And he's like, "It's not rumors, it's the actual truth." When I first watched this, and I did rewatch the scene a couple of times, I thought when he was saying he overheard them talking about it the day after she died, that he overheard Mr. Martin and her dad talking about it. But I've got to assume that it was Janet's dad and the school administration, because yes, Mr. Martin and Janet both did die in that fire, which explains why their scars are connected. I was still kind of wondering though, is the wristwatch actually their shared key, or is it possible Mr. Martin is Janet's key? I'm not really sure, since when Mr. Martin put Janet in the scar, she had the watch. Just a lingering question. How haunting was it when Janet did get to see the connected scars? Our poor girl Janet. But what's interesting is that Eugene said he tried to bring this up many different times over the years. In the newspaper articles that we had the ghost referencing, it did say other students blamed Mr. Martin for it, but why would they not believe him if that was printed in the newspaper, if multiple students were saying it and it wasn't just Eugene? Were they trying to avoid scandal? And if they're trying to avoid scandal, could that somehow play into the evil, cursed, or whatever nature of this school and why so many people are dying there? On the Reddit boards, it's funny because people are always saying, there's two different schools of thought. It's a school that's been there for years and, people die in places all the time. So it's not out of the realm that we get, say, a death every 10 years or something. Then there's people who say, my high school's been around for XYZ years and not one person has died there, or maybe one or two people. But to have this level of deaths at one high school, it really makes me think there is this bigger picture thing going on that Mr. Martin referenced. We saw it in the letter, the causal relationship between the energy as trauma and the high school itself. So what is the nefarious thing at play here? We know the mascot used to be a devil and then they changed it. I've been saying it could be a portal to hell. So if you want to get more into that theory, please do go check out Is Split River High School Cursed? That was a video I put out about a week ago, so don't miss that. And again, hopefully we get more answers on this when we do get our third season. Let us do our manifesting. I've been doing this in the last few videos. School Spirit Season 3, School Spirit Season 3, come to us, come to us, come to us. Let us all put the energy out there for that Season 3 announcement. And who knows, I am recording this early, so by the time it drops, maybe we'll have our Season 3 news and we can all rejoice. Let's dive into the happenings at Split River High School, and yes, there are a lot of them. First up, body swap number 1. They are able to get Mr. Martin in Mr. Anderson's body tied up into a chair and do their first successful body swap. I didn't think it would be that easy. I guess they did a great job getting Mr. Martin into this emotional state to allow that sort of transfer to happen. And what was funny was when Mr. Anderson eventually gets his body back, he has this whole monologue about how he actually liked teaching and said, in a way, he and Mr. Martin were the same. They got into it for the right reasons. But like Mr. Anderson also said, I never would lay a hand on one of my students, and everything that Mr. Martin did, pure evil. You know what? He said he accidentally started that fire, and that's fine. But the fact that he had the intention to do something bad that eventually did cause this, even though it was by accident, still a bad guy. The fact that he knew this whole time Janet couldn't cross over until she forgives him, bad guy. He's a bad guy for so many reasons. And now he's locked in this scar, which is kind of a personal hellscape. Will they end up letting him out? Will Janet have to let him out for him to actually give her these answers? And does he actually have answers about the school, or is he just using that as some sort of device to trick them and make sure that he gets let out so eventually he can cross over? Although I don't think that will happen for him, because I don't think Janet will ever forgive him, even though she came to terms with the fact that she didn't deserve her dad. She didn't deserve to be born in this time when she would not be able to thrive to her full potential. And most of all, like she said, she did not deserve Mr. Martin. She will never forgive him, but she did forgive herself, or at least come to terms with the fact that she didn't deserve any of this. And you know what? Janet was good the whole time. I did enjoy when Simon and Mr. Martin got into that little scuffle. Simon totally got sucker punched. Someone in the comments of one of my prior videos said, I can see Simon taking a bullet for Maddie. And yeah, that was kind of taking a bullet, I guess, for her, as was his actions to go and try to rescue her from the scar at the end. Simon is the type of friend that we all need in our lives. And speaking of Simon, we did see how that taser came into play. Janet ends up tasing Mr. Martin in order for them to be able to tie him up. So Simon didn't end up using it on himself, unless maybe that's how he ends up back in the scar. For some reason, he tases himself, goes unconscious, and can enter the scar. Still not sure about that, but at least we did get to see exactly how the taser came into play. That was something I did talk about in the last video. Once Mr. Anderson has his body back, Simon lets him know, hey, by the way, the cops are going to think you stole this car. He's like, oh, great. Luckily, Mr. Anderson was able to go to Sheriff Baxter, urge them to go and see, what is going on. I was worried in that instant that, Sandra would go. She'd end up getting caught in the afterlife at Split River High School. Of course, that didn't happen, although we did see Sandra inside of Maddie's scar. So eventually, the ghosts have this showdown with Mr. Martin in the hallway. He says things like, I've always had pure intention. I've always been on your side. I'm ready to show you everything. And then says to Janet, first you have to return to your true self. Mr. Martin, all the guy wants to do is leave the school. I think he would have really preferred to leave in Mr. Anderson's body, have Janet leave in Maddie's body, and they just kind of like run away together, I guess. But now that's not going to be possible. He doesn't have a body to inhabit, at least as of now. I did think that Mr. Martin would end up jumping into Simon, and that's what would happen. It did not. And again, there is still a little mystery surrounding exactly how Simon ended up inside of that scar. But Mr. Martin is working pretty hard to convince the ghosts and Janet that he was not a bad guy. And eventually he goes on to say exactly what happened the day of the fire, something that I think we've all been wanting to see. And then he's still trying to bribe all these kids. Like, there's more going on with the school. There's more to this school than you understand. And I just don't fully believe that that's true. But at the same time, I did make a whole video on the fact that I think the high school is cursed. So it's 50-50 shot Mr. Martin's telling the truth. We know he's a liar, so I guess we'll see. And was Mr. Martin being authentic when he said, Janet, I hurt you the most? Do we think that he actually cares and is really apologizing? Or is all of this one big show to get him to be able to get ready to cross over? Or trying to trick the ghosts to all go in the scars at the same time to generate the energy he needs to get beyond that fence? What do you guys think? There were quite a few emotional moments in this episode. I teared up multiple times. When Janet and Maddie are standing there before they have their body swap, you can just see the emotion within Maddie. She doesn't want to leave her ghost friend. She's worried that she's not going to be able to talk to them again. And the line by Rhonda, don't worry, Dorothy Gale, we're going to be okay here in Oz. I just love Rhonda. I was actually convinced that Rhonda might be the one to cross over. It was Wally. I'll get more into that later. But I love how the ghosts are like, Maddie, you need to go back. You need to do this. Even Wally tells Maddie eventually that it's time for her to go. They all want what's best for Maddie, similar to Simon, who has now put himself in quite a situation, all for the name of his best friend. In that moment when Janet apologizes to Maddie, Maddie forgives her. Janet says, I was in a tough time. I did not mean to hurt anybody. You saved me, Maddie. Are you even kidding me with this? The emotion. Janet was good the entire time. She never meant to hurt anybody. Now that is an authentic apology I buy all day long. And Janet says, she's done running. She asks for forgiveness, and they are able to do this body swap. Unfortunately, though, once Janet's spirit ends up leaving Maddie's body falls over unconscious because, of course, her spirit is still not in it. If I was Maddie, I'm literally sitting there like, girl, go back into your body. What are you doing? Go back into your body. But Maddie cares so much about these ghosts and instead sacrifices her own life to go back into the scars and to help them. Maddie gives Janet the watch, and it's just so interesting to see these two spirits existing at the same time while Maddie's body is laying there unconscious, which I did have a video earlier this season as well. Is Maddie's body comatose or dead? Well, she was in a little bit of a coma here, but not the overarching universal, oh, it was all a dream type of coma situation. And no, her body's not dead. She returns to the world of the living. So that's one theory that we can just cross off the list. Sometimes we get W's, sometimes we get L's. Gotta take them both, right? Eventually, Xavier, Claire, and Nicole show up and they share with everybody that, yes, Mr. Martin, in fact, wanted Janet dead after what they learned from Eugene. Mr. Martin ends up grabbing Janet and running into her scar. Luckily, Simon is there and is able to open the door. We get a lot of energy in this episode. Lights flickering left and right. I mean, at the end, when the whole school is flickering red, lots of energy here. And could this energy transfer, this big energy, have somehow allowed Simon to slip into the scar without dying? I mean, is there some sort of relation to this energy that perhaps allowed Simon to get in there without actually offing himself? Mr. Martin says, Janet, this is now for you and me. Janet has no idea where she is. She has never been inside of this scar before. She's never seen any of this stuff. And I think it's pretty eye-opening for her to hear that audio of all of the things that she never had a chance to accomplish, to see the fire burning, to see that lab coat that her grandmother gave her. It was so sad to watch. With Janet inside, the ghosts end up deciding to use this death map, which now they know there's this path with all of their connected scars, to go in and eventually make it in there so they could save Janet. And scars indeed. Wally ends up punching Mr. Manfredo within Rhonda's scar. They end up passing the entire football team within Wally's scar. And I think what hit me the most about this particular scar visit was the table full of Charlies making fun of himself in the cafeteria, like Charlie said he was his biggest bully. So it's interesting to get a little bit of different scar context here. And again, with the green lighting, is that because all of the ghosts are in there at once? That was the whole plan all along. Like Maddie said, this is actually a trap because Mr. Martin is trying to get all the ghosts in there because at one point he did surmise if they're all in there at one time, there will be a big enough energy transfer where he could somehow penetrate that electromagnetic field and leave the school. So again, I don't think his game is crossing over, even though he is locked within that scar, but he was smart enough to tempt all of these ghosts to come inside. But seriously, the Wally scar just tore me up a little bit. Watching the football team, seeing that scene with his mom, his casket, at the funeral at his gravesite. I mean, the Wally stuff just tore me up. And it was in that moment I could kind of see, you know what? I think Wally might be crossing over. There were a couple moments in this episode, but I don't think I'm ever going to get over Wally being gone. Milo Manheim has just been such a complete joy in this entire series. And his buns, didn't mind seeing that. Meanwhile, Simon's telling Maddie, hey, look, it's now or never. And of course, we know she does go and run into the scars with the ghosts and leaves her body laying there unconscious in Simon's arms. Maddie's key does in fact turn out to be the necklace. It starts glowing red. She grabs it. That allows her entry into the scars. And that's when we get to see Maddie's actual scar. We saw her going into a scar during the season, but we learned it was Janet's scar. Maddie's scar was something I didn't see coming, although it does make sense. She's of course haunted by her mom and her mom's drinking in there. But seeing her dad in there gives a whole new context to seeing her dad at the hospital and makes me think that perhaps she struggled with the fact that, yeah, she was there when her dad died. She couldn't save him. Kind of reminds me of the Phil Collins song. Little boy was drowning. I could not lend a hand. Like this whole, was Maddie not able to save him and watch him float down into that water? It sure seems like it, just given the visuals that we did see within that scar. I assumed this scene would either be, I don't know, at the lake, at the cabin, or in a pool. Never saw it coming that it would be pipes leaking into Maddie's scar. Did anybody else see that coming at all? I mean, I don't think any of us could have. But inside of these scars, something just in general for the season as a whole, I loved how it gave horror vibes. They leaned into the darkness, the horror, and made this season even darker, even grittier, even more ghostly than the first. And I am kind of dying to know if we do get the third season, now that we know there is something bigger going on with the school, it might get even darker, you guys. Are you ready for it? I am. So eventually the ghosts find Maddie and her scar, and they all end up making their way where Mr. Martin and Janet are within their connected scar. Mr. Martin is trying to get Janet to say the words that she forgives him, and she's like, forgive you for what? What did you do? And that's when Mr. Martin goes on to explain everything about the day of the fire. Janet says, why did you want me dead? Mr. Martin says, we aren't leaving here until it's done. Then Janet's putting the pieces together like, oh, that's yours, that's mine. These scars are connected. And interestingly, her scar is in green, his scar is in red, which makes sense because eventually that door appears. So it does make me think that this green is giving crossing over vibes. The lighting of it all I thought was just so interesting. So as it ends up, Mr. Martin was lying the entire time, made Janet think she was the one who started the fire when it was Mr. Martin and it was an accident. Although the fact that he had that intention, again, bad guy. But essentially Janet is haunting Mr. Martin's scar and he will never be able to cross over until Janet forgives him. And can we talk about the fact we got confirmation on Alice? Mr. Martin's fiance was in fact the brunette woman haunting the scar who said we needed more time. Apparently, she broke up with him when he lost his job and she didn't see a future with him. So not only did we have Janet in there haunting Mr. Martin, but also Alice. Something we did not get an answer to, though, is why they had another Alice as the person in that picture at Wally's class reunion. I'm not sure why they wouldn't have just picked another name. And unless the Alice storyline does come up again in season 3 and there is a connection, I still have some questions about that. Mr. Martin continues to say the school district had been looking for a reason to let him go. He's a thorn in their side. All it took was one phone call from Reverend Hamilton to make that happen. Mr. Martin said, wouldn't it serve them right if I disconnected the hoses and just let the gas do its job? He even kept an eye on his watch, counting how many seconds. He didn't go through with it, though. He reconnected the hose, went to open a window, but apparently had no idea that Janet would walk in and start testing flames. So, does seem like it was an accident, but if Mr. Martin hadn't been there and was trying to do this in the first place, he never would have killed him and Janet. One little minor criticism I have, though, is I really would have liked to have seen an actual reenactment and flashback of that. We got allusions to it, but sometimes it's nice to actually see it with your own eyes. I mean, yeah, the explanation is fine. We know what happened. We got an answer, but I think that was something for me that I wouldn't have minded actually watching. As I mentioned earlier, we also saw Janet's dad inside of her scar. Again, in that last episode, there was that closed captioning line that was kept in there about Janet's dad haunting her, even though she did not say the actual line of dialogue. They apparently did want to try to keep this a surprise, even though they kind of let the cat out of the bag a little bit. But we did see Reverend Hamilton. He was burning something inside of a fireplace. I would imagine something related to Janet's college acceptance or something like that. But I guess my other theory was wrong about who started the fire. I did a whole video on that as well, and I was really honing in on the fact that I did think it was going to be Reverend Hamilton. It was not, although he does play a role, obviously, in all of this happening because he was the one that got Mr. Martin fired, which led to Mr. Martin attempting to start this fire, which led to the accident that killed Janet and Mr. Martin. This is when the exit sign starts illuminating, when Janet is going through the fact that she did not deserve this, she didn't deserve her dad, didn't deserve to be born in this time, didn't deserve Mr. Martin. The gates of heaven are opening up through this school door exit sign, but I was shocked that Janet did not want to walk through and cross over. It's funny though, Mr. Martin tried. They of course prevented him from doing that. And like I said before, I'm not convinced that he would have actually been allowed to cross through because Janet never said the words and forgave him in the first place. And obviously, even with all of the ghosts in their scars, this door opening up and crossing over, we're still not seeing Mr. Martin be able to use this energy field and do what he's wanted to do this entire time and penetrate and break through that electromagnetic fence boundary for the school and get off school property. So that didn't happen either, even with all of the ghosts inside the scars, even with the very clear visual of the pulsating red within the school. So is it still possible that could happen? I mean, I guess so. And maybe it's tied into whatever nefarious is going on with the school and whatever malicious intent this building or land has. We'll see. Meanwhile, everyone's trying to take Maddie's body to the parking lot because the paramedics are on the way. Simon is like, hey, we gotta do this, but at the same time, we can't let her get off of here because then her spirit will never get in her body. Simon runs back in. The ghost and Maddie are running out. Simon runs back in to find Maddie. All the red lights are blinking. Sandra and Mr. Anderson are both there. And then comes the final goodbye. Did anybody else have a little piece of them die inside when Wally tells Maddie it's time to go? Ugh, heart-wrenching. It's an interesting shipping situation because a lot of people do ship Maddie and Wally, or were shipping Maddie and Wally. But again, it's such a tragic romance. Are we really rooting for somebody to stay in the afterlife and not return to the living so that way these two ghosts can be together? I mean, hey, I understand that. They seem like they were indeed soulmates. But perhaps this whole relationship happened for a reason and allowed Wally to end up crossing over. Maddie was the figurative key that Wally needed to get this type of closure, bring all these ghosts on this big adventure, give him some love in the afterlife, and allow him to go through that door. Maddie is able to get back into her body, although she is unconscious until later on when we see her wake up inside the hospital. Not sure exactly how long she was unconscious, but it doesn't seem that long because the friends are still looking for Simon. He doesn't have his phone. They're kind of assuming that he'll end up catching up with them, but then we learn that is not the case. And by the way, while this is happening, we're hearing this song Robbed, which was one of the second amazing needle drops in this episode. We flash back to Split River High School. We see the ghosts kind of talking the next day, going over everything that happened the night before. And Janet's still there. She says that she's going to go and ask Mr. Martin to kind of explain exactly what he meant with what's happening at the school itself. Meanwhile, they're wondering where Wally is. And yes, friends, he is busy crossing over. The song there is called Look Alive, another perfect song choice for that moment. The look on Wally's face as he's crossing over. I'm going to try not to tear up here on camera, but I mean, this hit me harder than almost anything of this entire series. Are you even kidding me? They flash back to the hospital. Maddie wakes up. Sandra is there. They give each other this big hug. And this is the mother-daughter moment I think we've all been waiting for. The authentic time when Sandra and the real Maddie are reunited. Sandra has been through so much. I feel confident that moving forward, she might actually be able to become the mom that Maddie has always needed. And I'm curious, is Maddie going to share with Sandra what she saw in that scar? Is Sandra open-minded enough to hear that? And then Xavier comes in and says, oh yeah, hey, I'm sorry. And by the way, I met your dad. Maddie can't see her dad. How is Xavier still able to see him even though he's among the world of the living now? What exactly is going on there? Does it have to do with the fact that Maddie saw her dad in the scar? I'm not sure how those two things are connected, but I am curious as to how Maddie will handle telling her mom about this and if she will in fact get to communicate with her dad. The big ending of this season, you guys, we have Janet walking back into the scar, telling Mr. Martin she's got some questions. You know who else has some questions? Not only Mr. Martin wondering what he's doing here, referring to Simon, but me and all of us. Is there some sort of tie-in with the energy, the trauma, the ghosts all going through their scars where maybe Simon was somehow able to bend the rules to get back in there? Or is the veil just so thin right now with everything happening that there is an exception to these rules? And maybe that's what Mr. Martin was talking about. The fact he went back in looking for Maddie when he was still, in fact, trying to get his own life back on track on the outside just shows the level of friendship and dedication that Simon has. And circling back to what the cast has been saying, think about the worst thing that could happen at the end, and it's even worse. Yes, this is even worse. The guy who's been helping Maddie investigate her own death, get out of there, get her body back, ends up being stuck at Split River High School, seemingly in the afterlife. The irony of it all. Now I'm going to get into some of my highs and lows of the season. Highs of the season, Wally and Maddie. That pool scene, that projector room scene, everything about these two. I love them together. But I will say that I'm also happy that things, I think, ended up the way that they should. I think it would have been so tragic for Maddie and Wally to end up together, even though it's tragic for us as viewers to watch Wally crossing over. So for me, those were some of the highs, but also Rhonda and Quinn's friendship and Charlie and Yuri. I've been going back and forth on, is Yuri a good guy? Is Yuri a bad guy? And something interesting with Yuri in this episode was the fact that he asked Janet, well, isn't this going to reset? And Janet says, no, I will teach you a way for it not to. And that's been something that's ongoing. People have been talking about the fact that Janet and Yuri were working together. Janet's pottery not resetting. What exactly? So obviously Janet does know a little bit more maybe than she's letting on. And I'm interested to see how she ends up teaching these ghosts about all these things. And we're going to get more Janet in season 3, obviously, right? I mean, if it comes back, her journey's not over. Again, I'm just honestly shocked she decided not to cross over after all this time, though. So yeah, highs of the season for me, mostly the personal relationships between the ghosts and really the character growth. A lot of these characters have been through so much. The fact that they're able to address their traumas face on, for me, those were pretty impactful moments. Lows of the season. Sometimes I was not as into the Nicole and Claire stuff. I don't know. I didn't mind as much the Xavier and Nicole shredhead ghost board stuff, but the Living Teen timeline was not always as compelling, and those characters are fine. I think all of the actors are great, but also just kind of inserting in Nicole's brother Diego out of nowhere felt a little bit disjointed for me. And I wouldn't say that's a low, just kind of a comment that I don't know that we necessarily needed that character, unless maybe he does come into play in the future, or they just needed somebody to be driving the car and discovering what the teens were up to. I mean, as far as other lows, I don't know that I really have any, except maybe I wouldn't have minded a little more answers. Like I said, seeing the actual flashbacks of the fire in full context from start to finish would have been something that I definitely didn't mind. But altogether, I thought this was a wonderful season of television, a great sophomore season, and it's been successful given the streaming numbers that we've seen. So not all shows can avoid the sophomore slump, but I think School Spirits has done a great job keeping the story going, keeping us engaged, and now setting up for a third season. Now we just have to hope that it actually comes. Biggest questions going into season 3. Pretty much regarding Simon. How did he get there? Is he going to get out? Is Maddie going to see him? But the biggest question of all, what's the deal with Split River High School? Why do so many people die there? What exactly is going on? So hopefully we will get more answers. This video has been a little bit longer than my usual reactions and reviews, but given it's the season finale and that we're not sure we're getting a third season, thought it was worth the extra discussion. And again, I will be doing a live stream on Friday, March 7th, so if you want to hop into the comments, I will also put a call-in link, so if anybody wants to come on camera, maybe give your high, your low, your biggest questions going into season 3, I think it'd be really fun to talk to other School Spirits fans. So again, keep an eye on my channel, make sure you like this video, and hit that subscribe button so you get an alert when I do go live. I will be back to talk more about School Spirits if we get more news. Notably, if we get that season 3 announcement, expect me to pop on here and celebrate so we can all rejoice in the fact that this wonderful supernatural teen drama will be coming back. And you know what, if it doesn't come back, I guess at least there are some silver linings. Maddie got her body back, Wally crossed over, so is that enough for you? Do you think if it ends here, you'll be okay? Or will you have that kind of background bitterness that I think all of us have when streamers cancel shows that we really love too soon? And one more time, thank you to all of you School Spirits fans for tuning in, sticking with me throughout the season. It has just been a blast. I love this show. And tell me in the comments, what are some other shows that you're excited about watching this year? I'm still working on my coverage schedule, so I will take all requests into consideration. Thank you so much. And if you do enjoy videos like this where I talk about dark TV shows, I am still covering Severance Season 2 on Apple TV Plus and The White Lotus on HBO Max, and we'll be adding some more shows into the roster, so stick with me for more TV talk. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back again soon. Media Melanie, clicking off.